Hi, welcome to this week's edition of PHQ, questions from the personality hacker community. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And Addison, let's get right to our question today.
Hey guys, I have a podcast request. Could you do one for extroverted feeling versus extroverted thinking? I find that I can communicate with people who use accuracy or authenticity, I'm an INFJ, but have difficulty communicating with effectiveness users. Steven.
Thank you, Stephen, for the question. Your question centers around what's called cognitive functions. Now, you're asking about some of the technical names, and you also mentioned some of our nicknames when you talked about accuracy and authenticity. Authenticity's technical name is introverted feeling. Accuracy's technical name is introverted thinking. And we've given those nicknames to those just to make them easier. And you even referenced the extroverted thinking nickname, which is effectiveness. The only nickname you didn't reference was extraverted feeling, which is our nickname is harmony for that. So the question centers around, in this question from you, Stephen, around extroverted feeling, which is harmony, versus extroverted thinking, which is effectiveness. So we're going to talk about that in this PHQ.
So I think what we should do is talk a little bit about a compare and contrast of these two cognitive functions, these two mental processes. And then we can talk a little bit about how specifically an INFJ can communicate with somebody who's using the effectiveness process. It kind of feels like it was a two-part question. So the first part is, now there's a lot of deep dives we've done into both of these processes. If you go into Personality Hacker website and you type in effectiveness or extroverted thinking, and also harmony or extroverted feeling, you will find articles that are written just about the types. But I think the nuances here are, or some of the reasons why people can get them confused sometimes, is that both of them are what's called extroverted judging processes. Now, what a judging process is it's anytime you're making evaluations about the world. Anytime you're really deciding how things should be. I usually talk about the difference between what are called perceiving processes, which are the intuitive and sensing processes, versus the judging, which are thinking and feeling processes. I usually talk about the differences by saying all of the judging processes, or what we call decision making, all have should statements wrapped into them. We see the world and we assign value to the things we're looking at. We decide how things should be based on whatever our decision making or judging process is. Both harmony and effectiveness are extroverted. So they're pointing those should statements. They're pointing those ways of looking at the world in evaluation and judgment. They're pointing them outward. So to some extent, you could see how these two processes could sometimes bottleneck with each other. Like, I think the outside world should look like this based on my process, and you think the outside world should look like this based on your process. And for harmony or extroverted feeling, all of the should statements are about getting people's needs met. It's about taking other people's feelings into consideration. It's about saying, how will people respond and react on an individual level and in a group dynamic? Whereas extroverted thinking or effectiveness is asking should questions based on what works. Should we implement this thing? Should we be pushing forward? Should we start this project? Should we, are we at a point where we recognize that, that we just need to shut it down? Or no, it's really going well and this is sustainable, so let's keep going. So they're both saying should or thinking in should terms in the outside world, but they're looking at two very different styles of criteria. One of the easiest ways that I've myself turn this into a metaphor is I talk about how would an effectiveness person organize cereal boxes and how would a harmony person organize cereal boxes. So an effectiveness person is going to go, okay, so I have limited amount of shelf space. I have generally 3 to 5 boxes of breakfast cereal. This is the place where it fits the best. This is the place where it's, it's mostly out of the way. You're not really going to see it. It's not going to be ugly. And also everybody can access it. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the cereal boxes here and I'm going to organize them right here. And that's where the cereal goes at all times. Whereas a harmony person is more thinking in terms of what will get everybody's needs met. So there could be, say, adult cereals, right? Like, I don't know, granolas or Great Grains or whatever, right? And those may need to be put up higher because that's the adult level, whereas there might be children cereal boxes. There could be like Lucky Charms or, I don't know, name your favorite sugar cereal. And they think, well, my 4 or 5-year-olds, they're going to want those. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put them on a completely different shelf further down in arm's reach of my 5-year-old who, can at this stage go get themselves breakfast cereal. So they might actually take the cereal, and even though they also have anywhere between 3 and 5 boxes, instead of putting them all where the quote-unquote breakfast cereal goes, they actually organize them based on the need of the individuals that will be using them. So they put breakfast cereals in 2 totally different shelves, but that makes sense to them because adults will want them on this higher shelf and little kids are going to want them on the lower shelf. So it's a concept of how to organize the things around you based on individual human need versus organizing things around you based on space, metrics, availability, like what makes sense when we're going to be talking about design or possibly space saving, or what just, you just put all the breakfast cereals together. That makes sense, right? Because you're going to want to know where the breakfast cereals are, so I'm going to put them all together. Just 2 different ways of thinking about organizing the world. Now, if you are used to seeing things in terms of getting people's needs met, and somebody comes through and it feels like they bulldoze through and don't care about the individual people's needs, that they're doing things based entirely on space saving or something else, and you suggest, hey, why don't we go ahead and put some of these breakfast cereals down further so that the kids can reach them, the effectiveness person is going to be like, well, no, they can get it there, right? They can crawl up on the counter, right? There's no problem with that. And then we all know where the breakfast cereal is. That makes sense. Another way of thinking about this, I heard a metaphor one time that if you look at how people organize their phone numbers. Now, we no longer have to do this as a general rule because we all have phones that organize our phone numbers for us, right? Like we generally have cell phones that do that. But before there were cell phones and smartphones, generally people had multiple different styles of writing down people's phone numbers. And you can definitely see an effectiveness person versus a harmony style. An effectiveness person most likely would write down phone numbers based on an alphabetized system. So no matter who was accessing those phone numbers, anybody could intuit how to use it. That's a sustainable system. If it's alphabetized based on last name, then all the person will need to know is first and last name, and they can find that phone number. Whereas a harmony person is far more likely to organize their phone numbers based on relationship. So like mom goes at the top, and then like sister or brother goes next, or like husband or wife goes first, or whatever it is. So a harmony person is far more likely to organize, or at that time, before we had smartphones that did this for us, organize phone numbers based on relationships, which is not necessarily intuitive based on everybody else. But that's not really what that was for. It's not really a system that needs to be accessible to everybody else. It's a system based on their personal relationships with the other people in their family. Or in their lives. So basically, anytime you have a harmony user, they're going to be projecting onto the world should statements that reflect their individual relationship with those people and trying to get those people's needs met. And anytime you have an effectiveness user, they're going to be projecting their should statements on the outside world based on utility and the ability for anybody to be able to access that system, whether or not it's sustainable, whether or not it's kind of like a one-size-fits-all. So effectiveness tends to be more templatized, and harmony tends to be more personalized. And when these two run into each other, you could see how one would think that the other one is off their rocker, right? Like, why would we organize it that way? That doesn't make any sense. You're not taking people into consideration, or you're overvaluing people, and it doesn't matter how those individuals feel. We need to organize it in a way that makes sense to everyone. So you can definitely see how these two would be in competition with each other at times.
Yeah, I would say for you as an INFJ, when you are talking to an effectiveness person, remember that the lowest common denominator of a system is what they're looking for. Like Antonia talked about with the Rolodex, organizing phone numbers, an effectiveness person wants to set up a system that will be usable by the majority of people in the majority of situations over a long period of time. And so when you're talking to that person, you might posit the idea, well, we could structure this to make it more approachable for people. The effectiveness person's saying, yeah, that might work for the next month for the people that you need to get their needs met immediately. But what happens after that month? This system needs to sustain itself for the next 10 years. That's gonna start to break down when now you're just thinking about people in the moment. That's not going to be sustainable over the long time. That's going to be customized. That's not going to be like a one-size-fits-all where people can fit to the system. So it's really the difference between, are people fitting to the system in the effectiveness approach, or is the system fitting to people in the harmony or extroverted feeling approach? And I think that you're right. I think there's a disconnect there. I think it's probably a lot harder for harmony people when they're really focused on wanting to meet the needs of people to see that system as like warm and approachable if it's very cold. And this is an illustration of how the two minds work. It's not always about systems, but if you can look at this metaphor, this example, you can see how an effectiveness person's come to the table. They want to create something that's elegant, that's the lowest common denominator for the majority of people. It's like how many people can we get that can use this system over time without having to customize it at all? And will it sustain over the long term? And sometimes that means it's not as flowery, it's not as robust, it's probably a very simple, basic system that has all of the ordination stripped out of it. It doesn't have all the flowery approachability and warm feelings that you probably would love to have as a harmony person that make you feel good about using that system, like the breakfast cereal example. So as you communicate with an effectiveness person and you have this in mind, put them at ease. Let them know, hey, I'm not trying to hijack a system that you think might be elegant here. I just have some criteria that I would love to get people's needs met. And I think effectiveness people realize that people have to get their needs met. They're understanding that they see everything as resource. And if you can paint people as a resource to them and illustrate, hey, people also need to get their needs met, or they're not going to function well as resources in this system you designed or this way you want to do this thing or the decisions you're making. I think if they can understand, oh yeah, that's true. People, if we don't meet these needs, we're not going to have the people as resources that are operating well. I can see the value in keeping people happy as well. So that communication of allowing people to feel like their needs are met, allowing them to feel like they're happy, they're satisfied, they're able to move through the world in a fun, pleasurable way. I think the effectiveness person realizes that that's a leverage point, and you just have to communicate that well to them.
Yeah, and I think an INFJ in particular could very much call upon their accuracy 10-year-old process. Mm-hmm. INFJs, they don't shy away from data. There's a lot about data and technical components that are actually quite intriguing to a lot of INFJs. And so, call upon that data part of you, like call upon the numbers parts of you. And if you can show an effectiveness person, your strategy in terms of metrics and numbers. Now, of course, obviously, sometimes things can't be metricized, and it's difficult to always call like cold pieces of data when you're talking to an effectiveness person, especially when you're championing a cause or championing a person or an individual or morale boosting or whatever. But if you can at all put it in terms of numbers, it's not that an effectiveness person needs to have that information at times. It just makes it more accessible to them because they're already thinking in those terms. So if you want to be more accessible to that effectiveness mind, if you can put it in percentages or metrics of some sort, that's great. And of course, right now I'm thinking of like an INFJ HR representative talking to an effectiveness CEO. So I'm kind of talking in those terms, like I already have a business context in my mind, but I could see this in personal context too. Being able to articulate how the things that are important and meaningful to you are actually not short-sighted. They're actually long-term. They're actually sustainable. You're seeing well into the future, and you're trying to figure out how to create these systems that won't break down over time, just like Joel mentioned. If you can present it in that way, I think an effectiveness person will actually appreciate that.
I think the thing that you want to do is put the effectiveness person at ease, that I'm not trying to come in and break your system just by definition. Like, let's say you're making a decision. Let's say you're with an effectiveness friend and you're deciding where to go out to dinner with a bunch of your friends, and you two have to make the decision, right? You've got to come up with a decision. Your criteria is, okay, I want to pick a restaurant or a place we can go that doesn't have loud music. It's got a great vibe where we can really connect with each other, have a great conversation. The room will, lend itself to that. The wait staff is going to be, reserved. They're not going to come and bug us every 2 minutes. It's going to be a great environment for that connection piece. And I mean, you could talk to an effectiveness person. That makes sense to an effectiveness person. Okay, that seems like a great way to go about an evening out because that makes sense to them as far as that's the most effective and efficient way to have an evening of connection, of time with friends and hanging out. So I think that you express some of that to them, the reasons why you're doing this. And the other thing I was also thinking is I think harmony and effectiveness work well in tandem, not necessarily in co-creation. And I want to unpack what I mean by that. I don't mean you can't work together, but I think that, and working in a silo is too strong of a term. but there are defined roles between the two. And I think they both work together, whether it's a personal relationship or a business relationship or any of the elements of the spectrum between those. I think they work well in tandem, kind of like partners running a race together where they each have a different aspect of that race. So you go out, you and an effectiveness person are planning an evening out with a bunch of your friends. You end up taking the social end of it, and the effectiveness person may handle the bill, the structural element of it, making sure that everybody knows where to get to. We're going to park in the parking garage close by. They're helping with the structural element. You're helping with the actual relational element during the dinner itself, where you're helping conversation. You're helping seat people to where they're going to be interacting the best. And you kind of take two different roles for the same goal together. So I think it's this idea of working in tandem. The two types can show up and work in tandem to get the same need met. They're just approaching it from two different perspectives, two different angles. But I think it's really come down to that. And your question is about communication, and it comes down to communication. And I think it really comes down for you as a harmony person, as an INFJ, to contextualize the things that are important to you in terms that an effectiveness person will resonate with and understand. And I think that's very doable. And like Antonia said, you can pull on the data set. You can pull on some of the ways that you understand how the effectiveness mind works. And I think it will work out well if you look at that in tandem together.
Yeah, I know a lot of harmony effectiveness relationships, like people who are married, and they have actually a really great relationship. I think what it is understanding that there are going to be moments of competition. There's going to be moments when both a harmony user and effectiveness user are going to look at the same thing and go, I know exactly how that should be. And it's going to be different. Right, like the two people are going to come to a maybe a radically or slightly or just a little bit different conclusion about how that thing should be. And then the question is, like, who gets to decide that? Who gets to determine that, that's the eventuality of whatever that thing was? And I think being clear on domain might help with this. Like,
Thank you. That's exactly what I was trying to articulate. Silo is the wrong word, but domain is a great word.
Yeah, I'm the right tool for the job in this context, and you're the right tool for the job in this context. And that doesn't mean that we can't talk about things. It doesn't mean that we can't communicate on, like, I have ideas on how this, like one person gets domain over like how the house ends up looking, or even maybe just rooms or whatever it is. And I can have some ideas on that, but maybe you should be the final rubber stamp call on that. Whereas in this other area, then I'll be the rubber stamp on this because this is probably closer to my domain. So I think domain is probably something that should be communicated and should be hammered out, because you're both going to have, again, strong opinions on how things should be going in the outside world. And as an INFJ in particular, I could understand how somebody who's leading with effectiveness, that's their driver process, their dominant cognitive function for you geeks out there is extroverted thinking. I could see an INFJ feeling that that's really cold. If you can foster some appreciation for when that style is absolutely imperative. One of the moments that really helped me understand how extroverted thinking or effectiveness as a driver could be just so important is, I don't know if you are into sci-fi or fantasy movies or whatever, but there's a movie called Serenity. It's based on a TV show that was called Firefly. It had 13 episodes. It's a Joss Whedon show. It was one of my all-time favorites. It got canceled. I wept, like most Firefly fans wept when it got canceled. And then a couple years later, they made a movie called Serenity to sort of wrap it up. And the main character is named Captain Malcolm Reynolds. And my best type guess for that character is an ENTJ. So he would be leading with the effectiveness process. And there's a moment in the movie of Serenity where they just keep, just bad crap just keeps happening to them, right? That's the movie, right? The movie is that there's conflict thrown at them over and over and challenges, etc. And there's a moment where this crew that he's been traveling with for, at this point, probably at least a year, if not longer, this crew that he loves and sees as part of his extended family. And you can tell that he just massively just has so much love and respect for everybody there. He basically treats them as children and says, look, if you don't get on my ship right this second so that we can go get this thing handled, which is incredibly important to get handled, if you don't get on my ship right now, I don't give two craps what your eventuality or fate is. I'm going to leave you here and you can die for all I care, but I am on my ship and I'm going. And of course, that galvanized the troops, right? Everybody was like, yeah, let's go. This is a scary thing, but we all got to get on the ship and we got to go. So there's this sense of there's moments when not caring what other people or how other people feel is exactly the right attitude to have. Like, you just can't be caring right now. We all have a mission. We all have a task. We all have to get on the ship. We all have to go, right? Like, and if you don't, that's on you. I'm going, and you can stay or leave. I don't care, but I'm going. Let's go. So that was a moment where I was like, yeah, that's exactly how he needed to be. So if you can watch movies or character studies or read books where the primary character or a character is leading with that effectiveness process and see moments like that where you're like, that is the tool for the job, I think you can have a little bit of sympathy for why it's so important to have this process around and understand what the end game for people who are leading with effectiveness, get kind of where they're coming from, get their end game. Why is it so important to have this in the world? Now, there's another character on the show who is an INFJ, and she's a wonderful character. She's graceful and she's beautiful and she's an incredible person and she's, very in touch with other people's emotions, and like everything about her is fantastic and fascinating. And he frequently talks to her about deeper subjects. Like you can tell that he's just super fascinated by her, and he just keeps coming back over and over and visiting and getting insight. And you can kind of tell that they have that sort of relationship where, he looks to her for insight and she looks to him for leadership, even though she's not officially one of his crew. And if you want to see this interplay, her name is Inara. So if you do end up watching the show or end up watching the movie, just kind of observe their relationship and their interplay. There are a lot of great examples of people of harmony users and effectiveness users really finding each other fascinating, maybe having a bit of a fiery relationship, maybe not always agreeing on how things should be, but both recognizing that each plays a really important role. And so character studies are great. Watching TV shows or reading books, as I mentioned, are really great. And then just kind of developing an appreciation for why the other half has to be there. And this goes for anybody who's an effectiveness user who gets frustrated with harmony users. Really dive deep and ask yourself, why are they so important? Why are they so imperative? And I think if you do that, you'll be able to understand like when there is that clash of, opinion, when there is that sense of like, well, why would the other person possibly think that we should be doing things this way when it's so obvious to do things this other way? I think that you'll be able to have greater appreciation for where they're coming from.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stephen, for the question. And if you have a question for us here at Personality Hacker, you can head over to our website, personalityhacker.com/questions. There's a place you can record a question, ask a question on online forum. Also, I'd recommend another place for you to hang out if you're really interested in, typology, understanding how to grow yourself as a person. One of the things we really focus on is personal growth. We have a community of like minds just like yourself over at facebook.com/personality hacker. We've got a Facebook group over there you can find a link to that you can join in. There's a lot of discussion happening there. And of course, we've got articles and resources on our main website, personalityhacker.com, and you can take a test to find out your personality type already if you don't know that. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Can't wait to talk with you on the next PHQ questions from the Personality Hacker community.